Hi, everybody. Now we will read chapter 21 of The Fields of Home. Okay, well, let's see now. Grandfather's War and Mine. Now remember, Ralph had his grandfather drove him off again. He left and went back to Boston. After I got back to Medford, which today is a suburb of Boston, I guess it was then too, I bought a Boston Globe, a Boston newspaper, and read all the male help wanted ads. I had to try at different places before I found a job, and the one I got was an easy one. That was the trouble with it. It was too easy. All I had to do was run an elevator up and down in an apartment hotel at Mount Vernon and Joy Streets. Those streets really exist in Boston too. If the job had been in a busy office building, a department store, or a warehouse, I wouldn't have minded it, but Gray Chambers was too dignified and too quiet. I had to wear a tight green uniform, be careful never to close the door hard enough to make any noise, and to speak almost in a whisper. When there was nobody to take up or bring down, I had to stand beside the elevator doorway, not cross my feet or lean against the wall. Most of the people who lived in Gray Chambers were bachelors or old maids, and they were all past 50. I went to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and stayed till midnight. But the only time I had anything to do was when they were going out to supper or coming back afterwards. The rest of the time I just stood and looked in the mirror or at the floor or the ceiling, thought about different things at the farm, and how any little hill looked. After a week of it, I wished I was back picking up useless rocks or spreading manure, and I wouldn't have cared how much Grandfather yelled, "Tunnel fool boy," at me. On my first Sunday night, I didn't have a single passenger after 8 o'clock. Long before midnight, I was having a terrible time to keep awake and stand up straight. When I had only 15 minutes more to wait, I was looking at my uniform in the mirror, telling myself I really was a tunnel fool boy. I heard the lobby door click. I just pulled my jacket down so my shirt wouldn't show around the middle, squared my shoulders, and was looking straight ahead when a familiar voice called out, "It's a God's wonder they ain't give you a bass drum. Where's the rest of the band?" I forgot all about Gray Chambers and whispering and shouted, "Hi, Uncle Levi, how did you get here?" "Come in a hansom cab. Man's got to put on a style when he goes visiting his folks on Beacon Hill. Kind of getting up in the world, ain't you?" I never noticed that Uncle Levi's voice was loud till the "ain't you" came echoing down from the dome of the lobby. I think he noticed it too, because he dropped the tone right down and said, "Cabbie's waiting outside. Ain't it about time you was knocking off for the day?" As he spoke, he was slipping his watch out of its little leather pouch. He looked at it and added, "Ain't nothing but the hank of the day left now, no ways. Just come from seeing Mary. She says you can sleep the night with me if you've a mind to." Uncle Levi at that time lived on a square called Scully Square in Boston in an apartment. I had never ridden in a hansom cab before. Those were horse-drawn taxi cabs. But the driver seemed to know Uncle Levi pretty well. "Fetch us to Hayes' place on Causeway Street," Uncle Levi told him. Then he slapped me on the leg and said, "Been to see Thomas. It's a God's wonder he hadn't starved before I got there. Don't calculate he'd had a bite except oatmeal since he run you and Millie off. Pot of the cussed stuff sitting on the back of the stove when I come. Burned on the bottom, dry on top, and sour in the middle. It's a God's wonder he ain't poisoned himself. Kind of victuals he'll eat when there ain't nobody to watch after him. Calculates what a man eats is wasted. Never seen him short a critter, but he'll pinch his own belly till there ain't enough left of him for the wind to get hold of." "His own belly or anybody else's," I said. Uncle Levi didn't seem to have heard me, and went on. Wouldn't doubt none it come from the hard row he had to hoe time he lost your grandma. Like to broke his heart, putting a debt agin the old place and all. Don't calculate he ate a decent meal twixt then and the day he paid the mortgage off. Took him 30 years. Couldn't think of another cussed thing the whole time. Scratch and dig and starve till he was wore down, then lay abed with chills and fever, and rant 'cause the work wasn't done." "He rants whether the work is done or not," I broke in, but Uncle Levi didn't pay any attention. He just sat, hunched forward a little, and looking at his hands, cupped over his knees. "Run Ralph and Frankie off before they was older than what you be. lacked having patience with him, lacked having the understanding that they want his head up over the mortgage as what he was. The cab had stopped in front of a restaurant with big bright windows. The driver had climbed down and stood by the cab step, but Uncle Levi didn't look up. Trouble with Thomas, he can't see out nobody else's window but his own. Can't see no farther than the walls roundabouts the land Father left him. Can't see no way of doing things except in the way Father done him. A shame. A shame Father spoiled him before ever he learned him to stand alone. How was it he didn't spoil you? I asked. Uncle Levi heard me, but he didn't look up. I come too late, he said. Thomas come when Father was 73. Father never calculated on getting a son at that age. Loved him more than the Almighty loves the world. Spoiled him rotten before ever he could walk. I come when Father was nigh under 80. Heard tell he clumb the house chimney, set a red flag, bragging to the neighbors he'd fetch another boy. Never knowed Father well. Time I was getting old enough to remember, he was getting on in years. Calculated I was more a nuisance to him than a joy. He lifted his big knuckled hands from his knees, rubbed one inside of the other, said slowly, "Curious, ain't it? Me, the spitting image of Father, Thomas not favoring him. There's times I wonder if that ain't hurt, Thomas." Uncle Levi raised his head heavily, then turned it quickly toward the driver. "Great day! How long we been sitting here?" he asked. "Come on, Ralph. These Hayes folks wax up a pretty good squash pie." The restaurant had a long glass case behind the counter with all kinds of cakes and pies, fruits, puddings, cookies, and coffee cakes on it. I wasn't very hungry, but Uncle Levi kept going along the counter, asking me if I didn't want some of this or some of that. Didn't make much difference whether I said I did or I didn't. He told the waiter to bring it to us anyway. When we went to the table, we had as many different desserts as they have at a church supper. Wow! I'd just taken a couple of swallows of milk when Uncle Levi said, "Ain't like blowing back the foam and drinking it warm off the lip of the pail, is it? Never did get so I didn't count warm milk worth a cow hair or two." "Old Bess likes warm milk," I told him. "I never milk, but what she'd come and whine for me to squirt it at her mouth. Before I came away, she got so she'd never miss a drop." Curious, ain't it, the way old Bess cleaves to Thomas? Same way as Thomas clove to Father. Poor old Bess. Dread the day of her passing. Thomas leans heavy on her for love. Children all away and wed. About all he's got left is old Bess and Millie. I looked up so quickly I spilled milk from my glass. "I didn't know she was back," I said. "I didn't think she'd ever come back." Uncle Levi sat, rubbing one hand inside the other, as he said, "Always has. Probably will this time." Curious, ain't it? Feeling it's growed up twixt Thomas and Millie. Thomas is awful fond of Millie. Then why did he say he never wanted to see her again? I asked. And why did he kick her screen door all to pieces? Uncle Levi didn't answer till he rubbed one hand over the other a dozen times. He watched them as the fingers dragged across the high knuckle bones and said slowly, "Thomas is in the midst of the biggest war ever a man fought. And you put him into it, Ralph. He comes as nigh to loving you as any man that walks the earth." Something in the way Uncle Levi said it made my throat hurt, and I blurted out, "He doesn't either. He hates me. Calls me useless and worthless. He's always yelling and calling me a town fool boy. If he cared as much about me as he does for the yellow colt, he wouldn't give me senseless jobs and tell me it's to keep me out of mischief. What's he trying to make me lug rocks off that high field by hand for, if he likes me so much? Tells me to put more manure on the field than he thinks I can haul in a week. Then, when I do it, he gets mad and says I've wasted it. Wouldn't be wasted if he'd put a decent crop on that field. I've tried a dozen times to tell him it would be good for strawberries and tomatoes. They'd make him 40 times what that dressing is worth. But every time I mention them, he nearly bites my head off. Millie and I put up most of the hay crop all alone. All he does is yammer because I ripped a little piece off the ridgepole of the barn. I made a rake for the having a side war all your own, ain't you, Ralph? Uncle Levi asked me quietly. I don't know what you mean by this war business, I said. If there's a war, it's a one-sided one. Grandfather's doing all the fighting. I haven't raised my voice to him once since I went back there. They use no machines he didn't tell you to? Well, the stone rake isn't really a machine. It's more like a harrow with the teeth set so they'll bring the rocks to the top. Thomas, he's mighty proud about it. Took me out to the field to see it. Then why do you call it a contraption and tell me to pick up the rocks by hand? Why do you tell me to haul more dressing than he thought I could and get mad because I did it? 'Tain't 'cause you done it, it's how you done it. For more than 50 years, Thomas has found the old place the way Father learned him to do it. He run his own boys off 'cause he made 'em do things the way Father done 'em, instead of keeping up with the times. He dug his hat out on them stony hills till the years and the malaria dried most of the sap out of him. It's a God's wonder it didn't kill him. 'Twould have killed any other man I know, but Thomas, he wouldn't change jot nor tittle. Like to broke his hat instead of using that cussed old mowing machine. Come the time he couldn't hand hoe the crops, he turned the whole place into hay. Sat back to ride out what further years the Almighty give him. When I looked up, Uncle Levi's eyes were blurry, but he smiled and laid one hand over on mine. Then you come along, and the war commenced. He seen you as a farmer. He seen the mark of the land on you, Ralph, and that you knowed the worth of a field. Why do you calculate he fought you on the high field? Why do you make him so cussed mad when you say strawberries and tomatoes? 'Tain't 'cause he thinks you're wrong, it's 'cause he knows you're right. It's 'cause he knows it can't be done without hired help, without the things he calls contraptions. He's fought against them so long, it's come to be his nature to hate 'em. For 2 or 3 minutes, Uncle Levi was quiet. Slowly his fingers stopped rubbing across his knuckles. He held his loosely closed fists side by side, with the knuckles up. Then the 2 forefingers lifted above them till they stood together like the spire of a church. Curious, he said. Never come to think of it this way before. But Father and the Almighty stand shoulder to shoulder in Thomas's belief, and the land they give him is holy ground. I calculate when he sees strangers and contraptions a working that ground, his feelings is a sight like them the Lord had when he seen the money changers in the temple. Uncle Levi looked up from his fingers. The ends of his mustache lifted with a smile. Leastwise, Thomas piles in them in about the same fashion as the Lord done. Ever since I'd had the elevator job, I'd known I wanted to go back to Grandfather's. The want had been growing stronger and stronger as Uncle Levi talked. When he said Grandfather knew I was right about the strawberries, I'd wanted to break right in and tell him I was going back and that Grandfather could yell at me all he wanted to. Then, when he talked about the money changes, I felt as if I'd gone all empty inside. I swallowed hard and said, then I'm not going back. It's better to let the whole place stay in hay. I don't want to be a money changer. I don't want to be a stranger on the place. And I don't want to be the cause of Grandfather's having a war with himself. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was quivering a little at the end. Uncle Levi reached over, took hold of my wrist hard. He looked right into my eyes and said, God love you, boy. You ain't a stranger to Thomas. You're his own blood and his father's blood. He's lacking the grace to show it to you, but he loves you and he's proud of you, Ralph. If you want, there wouldn't be no war. One day he looks at your young hands and sees them as his own when he was young, returning the soil and making it bloom, and fetching them wore-out rocky hills again in the mellow plowing fields. He sees the run-out hidden field abloom with clover, the wilderness field tuck up again. Then up pops the devil. Thomas, he ain't nobody's fool. He knows there ain't no hope to hold you, less'n you'll have the tools you need to do the job. Don't nobody have to tell him the job's too big for a young boy and an old man to do with their bare hands. Uncle Levi reached inside his coat pocket, took out a bundle of letters tied with a white thread. Curious, ain't it, the way this things are working on Thomas? He said, writ me more letters this last month than in all the days of his life put together. If it weren't for the handwriting, you swear to God they was from 2 separate men. One of 'em's full of what he's about to do, clearing the wilderness field anew, building a piece onto the barn, 20 head of milk cows, and asked me this and that, even asking me what I know about strawberries. Didn't know he'd wrote the government and half the seed companies about strawberries, did you? Never guessed why he was clearing that high field of stone. The next he's ranting and raving at me for trying to tell him how to farm. Poor Thomas, the awful war he's got himself into. T'ain't easy for a man of 72 to cast the idols out of his temple. Don't calculate he's been too easy to live with. I thought I knew all the fields on the place, I said. I don't know the wilderness field. Which one is it? West end of the pasture now. between the orchard wall and the hidden field, Uncle Levi told me. Might happen that could be the field where Thomas could win his war. Father and my half-brothers, Naya and Stephen and Jacob, cleared all the fields, except in only that one. That's how come Thomas left that field to be the one to slip back to wilderness. Couldn't find it in him to let go of a field that Father had cleared. How could he win his war on a field? I thought you said his war was all inside him. 'Tis. If 'twasn't, there wouldn't be no war. Thomas, he's like any other man in lots of ways. Wants to leave his mark on the face of the earth when he's gone. Father left the wilderness field for Thomas to clear. We done it once, him and I. Took us nigh under 3 years. Thomas ain't sure there's 3 years left to him. Still don't know what field you mean. It couldn't be the far west end of the pasture. That land is still covered as thick as a spatter with rocks the size of a rain barrel. Uncle Levi looked up at me across the top of his glasses. Don't you know where rocks comes from? Well, I told him, I read in my geography book they were left by the glaciers when they melted. By hub, it must have been one of them cussed glaciers melt across the whole state of Maine. Could be that's where they come from, but ain't what makes them such a pesky nuisance. Frost. Frost heaves them up every winter. Pick a field clean as a whistle in the fall, come spring it'll be peppered thick again. Excepting for a few great boulders, and want a stone the size of your fist left on that field 40 years agone. Mostly, Maine lands have struggled, twixt man and the wilderness. Clear it, turn your back on it, in a few years the wilderness will crowd in and claim it again. Uncle Levi sat looking at his hands for a minute or two, then said, By hub, I'm glad this meeting between you and me come about. Curious, ain't it? You recollect, when first I come down on the old farm in haying, Thomas and you and me are sitting in the kitchen after supper? The night I was soaking my blisters, we all went to sleep? Thomas is sitting with his feet in the oven. Yes, I remember it. Recollect what he said to you? I had to stop and think for a minute. Well, I remember he said the bull bellowed something awful when the barn burned. What else did he say to you? Didn't catch it all myself. Must have been dozing. Why, if I remember right, he said something about the new barn being 20-some feet shorter than the old one, and we were going to build the piece back on. That's a ticket. Now we're getting someplace. Maybe so, I said, but I don't see how that has anything to do with Grandfather's battle. You don't, do you? I didn't either till 2 minutes ago. I ought to have had sense enough to see through this before Frankie went off to learn a trade. I guess I'm dumb, I told him, but I don't have any idea what you're talking about. Why do you calculate Thomas has been so cussed ugly? He asked me. Why do you calculate he's come to be a man that can't get along with himself and nobody else? Why do you suppose he don't want nobody to come to the old place? What makes him so tarnation stingy the devil himself wouldn't want him? Great day of judgment. Maybe it's the malaria, I said. Some, but that ain't the half of it. How would you feel? Your father left you a job of work to do, like putting the wilderness field under the plow. The day was fast coming when you'd be going to meet your father. You'd have to look him in the eye and tell him the job wasn't done. How'd you feel if you made your mark on the earth, built the biggest barn in all the country roundabouts, fire had burned it down, you knowed you couldn't build it back alone, and through your own cantankerousness you'd run off them that could help you do it? Well, I don't think I'd feel very good about it. Thomas neither. I calculate it's been annoyed at him like a canker all these 20 years agone, poisoning his innards till he heaves it off in spite and meanness. Thomas, he's like a little kettle with no spout and too tight a lid. Never learnt to talk with other folks and leave off his steam whisk by whiffs. Holds it back till the lid blows off, the nearest one gets scalded. Scrounge and scrimp, squeeze and hoard up a few pennies, so's he'll have something to pass on to his children, except in a wore-out old farm in the place of the fertile one Father left him. Yes, I know, I've been scalded, but what can I do to help it? I ain't certain of a blessed thing, but it's a pill I'd for certain like to try on him. Supposing we used to get him all head up on you and him clearing the wilderness field again, building back onto the barn. Ain't nothing in the almighty's world he'd sooner have than look back on, come his time to go. That is, if I've been calculating right here. There's lots of foolish things Thomas does, but he ain't foolish. He'll know there ain't a living ghost of a chance of you doing it the way we done it before. He'll know. Give him time to study out by himself. You got to have the tools to do the job. Appears to me a man will generally always, given his chance, take the things he wants the most. If we can make Thomas want the clearing of the wilderness field and the building of the barn more than he hates contraptions, might happily be we could help to swing the tide of the war. Great day. We better get out of here before they mop us up for leftovers. Here it is 9 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Don't seem like we've been here no time at all. It's a God's wonder you ain't fell asleep long ago. Ain't you going to finish your victuals? The next morning, I found a boy to take my elevator job, and that evening, the whole family came into the wharf with me when I took the boat for Bath. Uncle Levi was there with as many bundles as he could carry. He bought me a ticket for a stateroom up on the deck of the ship. After the man had called, "All ashore that's going ashore," and Mother and the other children had started for the gangplank, Uncle Levi popped his head back into my room and whispered, "Don't say nothing to Thomas about the pill business till I get down there. 'Twon't be no longer than I can help. Might try getting him to whistle off steam a trifle as he goes, instead of building up too big a head. Keep your nose clean." I had planned to go out on deck and watch the lights of Boston fade away as the ship sailed out of the harbor, but I didn't do it. As soon as everyone was gone, I realized I was awfully tired and thought I'd lie down for just a few minutes while we pulled away from the pier. Next thing I knew, the ship was quiet. There was only the gentle pulsing of the engines, and pale gray light showed at the window. I still had all my clothes on, so I slid off the bunk and went out on the deck. It was gray dawn, and not a breath of air was stirring. The water lay like a great tabletop, with a blue-gray silk scarf spread over it. A light mist rose from the water, and through it I could see dozens of islands, like big handfuls of dark green leaves, draped here and there on the scarf. The only living thing seemed to be the wide wake, like a great white flecked sea serpent following us through the water. There's a picture of him on the deck of the ship looking at the islands. They're at the Maine coast now, I believe. Let's see. There's only one man on the deck, and from the blue uniform and white cap, I knew he must be an officer of the ship. He was leaning his elbows at the side rail, looking off toward the islands. I wanted to be all alone, so I walked up to the passageway on the other side of the ship, past the rows of cabins, almost to the very peak of the bow. Then I leaned on the rail, too. From there, I could feel, more than hear, the engines. It was almost as though the ship were alive, but sleeping. Its heart was beating slow and steady in its breast. The only real sound was the whisper of water as the prow slid forward. For me, it was like that moment just before church service, when you're waiting for the organ to sing out, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow," when the song goes on. So slowly that I didn't know what was happening, the daylight grew stronger, and the mist drew back into the water. The islands became clearer. I could see shoulders of rock at the waterlines, and dark green pines covering their domes. Off to the left, the hills of the mainland seemed to be gliding toward us across the surface of the water. They rolled down in great curving folds to the shore, and as they came nearer, birches stood clear and white against the black-green background of the pines. I had always thought that nothing could be as beautiful as the Rocky Mountains west of Denver when the first rays of sunlight caught their peaks. For me, there had always been excitement and glory in their strength and roughness. They always made me want to shout and clench my fists and sing. Here on the ship, leaning against the rail, with the wooded hills and islands gliding toward me across the still water, the feeling was entirely different. I wanted to be quiet and alone. It must have come gradually like the daylight, because I only came to realize slowly that the Lord's Prayer was going over and over in my mind. Off to the right, about half a mile away, the islands grew larger and higher. Then the sun touched the tops of the pines along the ridge. I knew it must be mainland, and that we were moving into the mouth of a great river. When I looked back from watching the sunlight grow along the ridge, the blue uniformed officer was leaning on the rail beside me. He was an old man. His face was lean and leathery, with deep lines. and it was as calm as I felt inside. He must have known the way I was feeling, because his voice was just above a whisper when he said, "Kennebec, pretty, ain't it?" I couldn't have spoken out loud right then, and whispered back, "Yes, beautiful." He didn't say anything more till we stood there 5 or 6 minutes, and there was only the pulse of the engines as we came into the river itself. Then he laid his hand on my shoulder for a moment and said, "Main blood in ye, ain't there, lad? Man can always tell it." I just nodded, and he walked away as quietly as he had come. Wow. It's the end of that chapter. Read the next one, I hope, tomorrow. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.